Salutations and welcome you glorious people. I'm your host, Void, and this is the compilation of the Ibis paint animation tutorial series. I will also be using this PNG tuber model for now. I may make a video on making a better one in the future, but, without further ado, roll the tapes. I've gotten some questions on what program I use to animate and how I animate, so I'm going to give a quick rundown on what I use. This is gonna be a multi-part series just so I can go in depth here rather than making a short tutorial video, but I will probably have a video that puts all of the parts together back to back if you want to see all of them. This is gonna be just a little rant on how I even got into animating in the first place. If you don't want to hear the explanation, go to the link video right above the description or at the timestamp on screen or in the description. In short, I use Ibis Paint X's animation feature. Wow, what a shock considering I post on there too. Jokes aside, I use it mainly because I tried 𝐹lipp and didn't like the rather minimal layout, so when I found out Ibis Paint had an animation feature, I jumped at the opportunity. Now, of course, my first animations were bad, but that's just what happens when you start something new. Don't be like me and mistake smudge frames for actual smudge frames. The only reason I am as good as I am at animation now is because of making that first PNG tuber model thing for Nyx. Do go check her out too, by the way, because that's when I realized that you could cut your art into different parts while you draw it and animate it, much akin to drawing a model for live 2D but instead a little less complicated, sometimes. This was kinda a game changer since I utterly despised having to draw and render the same thing over and over. This also saved me an ungodly amount of time and is actually what made me power through the 489 meme I made, which just so happened to be the next animation after I made that PNG tuber model. Alright, when you first open Ibis Paint X and go to make a new artwork, scroll down to the bottom. Here is where you'll find the animation portion. You can either choose a 1:1 ratio, a square, or a 3:4 ratio, a rectangle, unless you have a Prime membership, of which both I and many others do not have. Go to the ratio you want and click on it, or click here to change the size. Once done, you're met with what seems to be a normal canvas just with the added plus, play, and 3 dots. Clicking on the plus adds a new layer, clicking on the play button makes whatever frames you have play, and the 3 dots open up to these. As it states, you can change the frame settings, duplicate, or delete the current frame. You can also access the frame settings by clicking on the frame in question, which also gives you access to deleting or duplicating that frame. Accessing the animation settings brings you here. This is where you can change the frames per second, play options, or customize your onion skins to your liking. The frames per second changes how many frames in the entire animation are shown per second. In other words, the higher the frames per second, the more frames you need for 1 second of animation. Personally, I like animating in 7 to 9 frames per second and nothing more or less. The play options include loop that makes the last frame of your animation go back to the first frame of your animation, like a GIF. Ping pong makes it go through the animation entirely and then go back to the start in reverse. And one shot, as the name suggests, makes it go through in one shot. You can only post it in either loop or ping pong on Ibis website, however. As for the onion skins, it can either show you the frames before or after. I would recommend to keep in mind that it only shows the parts that are not covered. So if you have a background you drew, I'd recommend temporarily making it invisible. The number of onion skins affects if you see 1 frame to 5 frames in the past or future. Other than those, it's essentially the same, just drawing on a smaller canvas. Miscellaneous tip time. This works on literally any artwork and even across artwork, so long as you recently copied/cut whatever it was you wanted, but it still is useful. To do so, you just need to click on the dotted line box and click either copy, paste, or cut. This is how I put in most of the backgrounds and other repeating things in my animations. If you're planning on making an artwork and cutting it for animation like I do, I'd recommend to, firstly, make it large. Don't go making it at scale with the animation, in my case, 640 pixels by 480 pixels, I'll get to that. Secondly, if you're planning on having wings or something in the final product be slightly off screen, make sure that it's at least drawn in the same ratio as the animation in question or bigger, i.e., not cutting them off entirely so you have wiggle room and room for mistakes, because everyone makes mistakes and no matter how good or proficient they are in that field. It makes it more annoying when you have to use the liquify tool to shape something you don't even know the exact shape of in the animation. This happened with Seth's wings in the _666 animation. Back to the scale with animation thing, if you also post the artwork version of it, makes it really grainy, of which I know that some people like the grainy pixelatedness, but I doubt that everyone wants that. Not to mention how it's way easier to just draw it at a larger scale and then scale it down later as opposed to scaling it up later, which results in it usually looking quite blurry depending on how much you zoomed in. So, just save yourself the hassle. Not to mention how it's rather easy to find a larger size that still fits the ratio, literally, just look at the higher ratios on the animation if you're so confused. You can even go onto a test canvas that is set to whatever ratio you're looking for given the animation and keep the ratio while scaling it up. When actually animating, though, I'd recommend to first get down the main poses of the animation. That way you have somewhat of a plan on how it's gonna be. As for in-betweens, I personally just make it closer to the first frame beginning it and then suddenly make it closer to the last frame since the human brain does the rest of the work. Moving on to simple animation tricks that I love, you can make a very easy transition from pose to pose by using the perspective transformation tool. First, you make the character or whatever squish down, then stretch up, and then the next pose. It's really simple and fast. Warnings. If you're a person who uses a lot of layers, it's gonna take more time to go into and out of the animation from the gallery. To combat this, I'd recommend to merge down all the layers of a section that you know you're not gonna edit more so that Ibis doesn't have a heart attack. This especially comes into play when you're in the middle of animating and Ibis just crashes. I've noticed that, at least on a phone, it really likes to crash again right when you're about to finish fixing the initial crash. If you're really scared of this occurring and you losing all your progress, you could do safety saves by duplicating the animation and then working on the duplicated version so you at least don't lose everything.